It started with the sound of rain against the windshield and a map that kept folding itself the wrong way. I was somewhere in southern West Virginia, winding through the back roads near the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. The fog hung low that October evening, a pale grey curtain swallowing the road ahead. My GPS had lost signal about an hour earlier, and I had not passed a single house since, just endless trees, their branches bare and black like bones against the fading light. I was on my way to meet a friend at a cabin we had rented for a long weekend. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a break from the noise of the city, just hiking, campfires, and quiet nights. But as the miles stretched on and the road narrowed, I began to realize that this place was far more remote than I imagined. My phone showed no bars, and the last road sign I had seen was so rusted I could barely read it. The rain picked up, steady at first, then heavier, hammering the roof of my car. My wipers squealed across the glass, barely keeping up. The road turned into a thin strip of gravel that disappeared into the mist. I slowed down, leaning forward, squinting through the rain. That was when I saw it. A wooden sign just ahead, nearly hidden by weeds. It read, Crawford Hollow, 2 miles. I remembered the name. My friend Mark had texted it to me earlier. Cabins near Crawford Hollow, look for an old wooden sign. So I pressed on, relieved to finally know I was close. But as the tires crunched over the gravel, I noticed how silent the forest had become. The sound of rain was the only thing that existed. No crickets, no wind, no life. After a few minutes, the gravel road opened into a small clearing. There was the cabin, 1 story, made of dark wood. The porch sagging slightly, a faint light glowing from inside. Mark's truck was parked out front. Slick with rain, I exhaled, grabbed my bag, and hurried inside through the downpour. When I pushed open the door, the warmth of the wood stove hit me instantly. Mark was sitting at the table, staring at something spread out in front of him. It was a map, old and yellowed, covered in hand-drawn lines and strange symbols. He looked up when I entered. "Man, you made it," he said with a tired smile. "You took your time." "The roads out here are insane," I muttered, hanging my jacket by the door. "This place looks older than I expected," Mark chuckled. "That's because it is. This cabin's been here since the early 1900s. Locals say the whole valley was part of a mining town before it vanished." "Vanished?" I raised a brow. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, Crawford Hollow used to be a mining community, coal and iron. Then in the 1940s everyone just left. Some say a fire spread underground. Others say something else drove them away. No one really knows." The rain drummed against the roof, heavy and constant. I sat down across from him, glancing at the map again. "Where did you get this?" He hesitated. "Found it under one of the floorboards when I was unpacking. Thought it was kind of cool until I noticed. These," he pointed to several spots marked with small black circles. "Each one has a date next to it, October, different years." "Maybe mining sites?" I suggested. Mark shook his head. "Maybe. But the weird part is the last date is this year. October 15th. I frowned. "That's today." The wind pressed against the walls just then, groaning like a voice straining to speak. The fire flickered. Mark forced a laugh, rubbing his arms. "Probably just coincidence." We spent the next hour trying to make the place feel normal, unpacking, eating canned soup, joking about how remote it was. But something in the air felt off. Every time I looked toward the window, I swore I saw movement in the trees. The fog was so thick now that it looked like the forest was swallowing the cabin whole. Around midnight we heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from under the floorboards. We both froze. At first it sounded rhythmic, almost gentle, like water dripping. Then it grew louder. Scratch tap, scratch tap. It moved beneath our feet, traveling from one side of the cabin to the other. Probably mice. I whispered, though my voice shook. Mark nodded, but I could tell he did not believe it either. The tapping stopped for a moment, replaced by silence so deep it made my skin crawl. Then came 3 slow knocks against the underside of the floor. Knock, knock, knock. We both stared at the same spot on the floor. Mark grabbed the flashlight from the table and crouched down. "There's a hatch here," he muttered, brushing away dust. Sure enough, an old trapdoor was half hidden beneath a rug. He pulled at the handle, but it would not move. "Leave it," I said quickly. "Whatever's down there can stay there." He hesitated, then let go. "Yeah, you're right. We barely slept that night. Every sound from the woods made us flinch when dawn finally came. The fog was still there, thicker than ever, the rain softer but unending. I stepped outside for air, the ground squelching beneath my boots. The forest looked endless, gray and dripping. Then I saw it, just at the edge of the tree line. A figure. It stood motionless, tall and thin, dressed in what looked like torn work clothes, a miner's helmet tilted slightly forward. Its face was pale, almost gray, but its eyes, there were no eyes, just hollow sockets. I stumbled back, calling for Mark, but when he rushed outside, the figure was gone. Only the fog remained. He looked at me, pale. "You saw it too?" That was all we needed. We packed everything and left within 10 minutes. The road out of Crawford Hollow felt longer, the fog clinging to the car like it did not want us to leave. When I finally got home, I searched the map online. There was no record of Crawford Hollow anywhere. Not in county records, not on satellite maps. Nothing, but sometimes, when it rains in October, I dream of that cabin. The sound of those 3 knocks echoing beneath my bed, and in the dream, I always hear a voice whispering from the dark, "You came back too soon." The wind howled that night through the Blue Ridge foothills, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and something older, like damp soil freshly unearthed. I was driving through Boone County after sunset, the kind of place where fog hangs heavy on the road, and headlights only seem to make the darkness deeper. I had been on assignment for a regional hiking magazine, collecting interviews from locals about old Appalachian legends. What I found instead was something I can still hear when the world goes quiet. Like it never really left me. The gas station was nearly invisible off the winding road, one flickering light marking its roof like a dying heartbeat. I pulled in mostly out of desperation, empty tank, no signal. And my GPS had been dead for miles inside. It smelled of old wood and rain-soaked asphalt. The man behind the counter looked at me like I was the first stranger he had seen all year. "Evening," I said, setting my wallet down. "Pump 3. "Please," he nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the window. "You're not from around here," I smiled. "Just passing through." "Then you'd best keep it that way. Weather's bad. And the woods up that ridge don't take kindly to folks after dark." I tried to laugh it off. "You mean wild animals?" He didn't answer, just stared. Then, as if reconsidering his silence, he leaned forward. "Ever hear of the Boone Hollow Church?" I shook my head. He pointed past the road. "About 5 miles west, through the trees, old. Burned down a long time ago. They say it still rings its bell when storms come through." A cold chill ran through me. Even though it's burned down, even though there's nothing left but ash and a foundation. He paused, his voice lower now. "If you hear that bell tonight, you keep driving. Don't look for it." I thanked him, half amused, half unsettled, and filled my tank. But as I drove back onto the road, rain began to fall again, heavy and cold, blurring the windshield. The rhythmic beat of it was hypnotic. I turned on the wipers and focused on the narrow curve of the mountain road. That was when I heard it. The bell, soft, distant, faint through the storm but unmistakable. My first thought was that it must be from a nearby farm or chapel, maybe a mechanical timer or a wind chime. But the deeper I drove into the hollow, the louder it became, not a sharp metallic ring, but a dull, mournful tone, echoing through the trees as if carried by the rain. I slowed the car to a crawl. The sound wasn't fading. It was calling something in me. Curiosity, stupidity, or maybe both, made me pull off the road. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the downpour. The beam barely pierced the fog. Water soaked my jacket instantly, my boots sinking into the mud as I followed the sound down a narrow deer path that disappeared into the woods. The bell rang again and again. Every step deeper made the forest feel thicker, as though the trees were closing in. Branches creaked overhead. My flashlight flickered once, twice. Then I saw something in the distance. Black against grey, a small shape in the rain. It was a church, or what was left of one. Its charred frame leaned like a skeleton against the hillside. The steeple gone, roof caved in, but the bell tower somehow still standing. I froze, rain dripping from my hair, watching as the old bronze bell swung gently back and forth. As if an unseen hand pushed it, I wanted to run. Every instinct told me to leave, but my legs carried me forward. I reached the church steps, my boots scraping the wood that crumbled beneath each step. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, and it smelled faintly of smoke, fresh smoke, not the lingering ghost of something long burned. When I reached the doorway, I saw them, footprints, bare, human footprints leading from the doorway into the church, pressed into the wet ash, each print perfect, the toes visible, the heels sharp. I followed them, my breath visible in the air now. Inside, the walls were blackened, half-eaten by rot. The pews collapsed in jagged heaps, yet the altar stood untouched, and on it a single candle burned. Its flame didn't flicker. I took one step closer, and the bell rang again, this time louder, so loud it shook the walls. The candle went out instantly. "Who's there?" I shouted. The sound that answered was not a voice. It was weeping low, broken sobs coming from behind the altar. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I forced it toward the sound, the beam cutting across the dark. There was nothing at first, just collapsed beams and smoke curling along the floor. Then something moved. A figure rose slowly, its shape human but too pale, too wet-looking, as though made of the same ash that coated the walls. It stepped into the light and my breath caught. It was a woman. Her eyes were hollow pits, her hair matted with soot, and when she opened her mouth, the sound that came out wasn't speech. It was the bell's tone, that long, heavy chime. Coming from deep inside her, I stumbled backward, hitting a beam, my flashlight flying from my grip. The bell tolled again, echoing in my skull, shaking my ribs. I bolted for the door, slipping on the wet ash, my hands scraping splinters and stone. Outside, the rain had stopped. The forest was utterly still. I ran until my lungs burned, tripping through the trees until I saw the road. When I reached my car, I slammed the door shut and locked it. Hands shaking so hard, I dropped the keys twice before getting the engine started. The bell still rang behind me, but now it was faint, far away. When I finally made it back to town, dawn was breaking. The gas station was still there, but the man from the night before was gone. A younger clerk stood behind the counter. I asked him about the church. My voice barely steady. He frowned. Boone Hollow Church? That place burned down in 1934. My granddad said they never found out what caused it. Whole congregation inside during service. I swallowed hard. And the bell. He hesitated. The bell melted in the fire. I drove home that morning with the windows rolled up, the radio silent. For weeks afterward, I told myself I must have imagined it, that maybe it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or stress. But last October, I woke to the sound of rain against my window, and faintly somewhere far off in the distance, I swear I heard it again, the low, slow toll of that forgotten bell. Calling from the mountains, the forest was dead silent. except for the steady drip of rain sliding off the leaves. Jason had always loved hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, but this time, something about the silence felt wrong. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. He had taken an old trail near an abandoned ranger station. One locals warned about. They called it the Hollow Path. Stories about missing hunters, eerie voices, and a creature that moved like the wind. Jason laughed at those tales until now, because something was definitely following him. Every few steps he heard a shuffle. Not an animal, it was heavy, 2 feet human-like. He spun around. Nothing but dripping ferns and a fog so thick it looked like smoke. He told himself it was just nerves. Appalachian fog could play tricks on your eyes, but then, a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." A woman's voice so faint it sounded like it came from the mist itself. Jason froze, his flashlight flickered. "Hello?" he called. His breath came out in a white puff. The whisper came again, closer. "Leave. Before he sees you." He scanned the trees, his pulse thundering. Then deep in the fog, he saw a faint light, like a lantern swaying slowly. He thought maybe it was a ranger, maybe help. He pushed forward, ignoring the way the air felt colder with every step. When he reached the light, it wasn't a lantern, it was an old oil lamp, hanging from a broken tree branch, still burning. Under it stood a woman. She was pale, dressed in an old, mud-soaked dress that clung to her thin frame. Her hair was dripping wet, her eyes sunken and black. Jason stumbled back. "Who are you?" She just stared at him. Then slowly, her mouth stretched into a grin that wasn't humanly possible. Her voice dropped to a growl. "He's behind you." Jason turned, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A tall, skeletal man stood in the fog. His face was grey, eyes glowing faint red, jaw slack like a corpse mid-scream. The man moved in jerky steps, like bones cracking with every twitch. Jason ran, branches whipped at his face, and the forest came alive with whispers. Dozens of them chanting, "You shouldn't be here." He tripped, rolled, and scrambled to his feet, only to realize the trail was gone. The fog had swallowed it. He kept running until his flashlight hit something. The ranger station. He burst through the door and slammed it shut. Chest heaving, the cabin smelled of mold and damp wood. The door creaked under pressure, as if something was pressing from outside. Jason backed away slowly. Then he heard footsteps. Inside, he raised his light. The pale woman stood in the corner, her head twitching, lips trembling. She whispered one word, "Run." The door exploded open, and Jason barely ducked as long. Bony fingers reached inside. He sprinted for the back, crashing through a half-rotted window. The woods blurred around him. He didn't stop until he reached his car at dawn. When he looked back, the fog was gone. But on his windshield, drawn in wet fingerprints, were the words, "You shouldn't be here." Locals found his abandoned car days later. Keys still in the ignition, door wide open. Jason was never seen again. But hikers still say that if you walk the hollow path on a rainy October night, you'll see a faint lantern swaying in the fog. And if you hear a whisper telling you to leave, you'd better listen, because not everyone who ignores it makes it back out of those mountains alive. The night the screaming started, Clara was staying in her grandmother's old cabin deep in the Appalachian woods. It was the kind of place that felt like it had a soul, or maybe something darker. The porch sagged, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and every floorboard groaned like it remembered every footstep that had ever crossed it. Clara came back to clear it out after her grandmother's passing. She loved the woman dearly, but she'd always been strange about that house. She used to say things like, "Never open the cellar door after sunset," or "If you hear someone crying in the woods, don't you dare go looking." Clara had brushed it off as superstition, until that October night, the wind outside howled like something alive. The trees swayed against the moonlight, their shadows crawling across the window pane. Clara sat by the fireplace, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching her from the window. She wrapped herself in a blanket, poured another cup of coffee and muttered, "It's just the wind," but then it came. Faint, distant, and unmistakably human. A scream, not just any scream, it was sharp, desperate, and full of pain. Clara froze, her mug trembling in her hand. Then a second scream, closer this time. "Hello?" she called, standing. Her voice cracked. "Is anyone out there?" Nothing, just the sound of the wind again. She went to the front door, hesitated, then opened it slowly. Cold air rushed in. The forest was black except for the faint glow of the moon. Then she heard it again, the scream, louder, from the direction of the old well behind the cabin. Clara grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside, her bare feet crunching over wet leaves as she approached the well. The air grew colder, the screaming stopped. She shined her light down into the well, but it was dry, empty then. Right beside her ear, a whisper, "Help me!" Clara screamed. Spinning around, no one was there. Her light flickered. She ran back toward the cabin, but the front door was wide open. Swaying in the wind, she was sure she'd closed it. Inside, the fire was out. The air felt wrong, heavier, like something unseen was breathing in the same space as her. Her grandmother's rocking chair was moving slowly, creaking back and forth, and sitting in it was her grandmother. At least that's what Clara thought. The old woman's back was to her hair the same silver white, her shoulders frail and bent. Clara's voice shook. "Grandma." The figure didn't move. "Grandma, it's me. It's Clara." The chair stopped rocking. The air turned ice cold. Then the woman's head turned all the way around. Her mouth hung open in an impossible grin. Her eyes were black holes. Clara stumbled backward, her flashlight clattering to the floor. From all around her, she began to hear more voices, dozens of them, men, women, children, all whispering in unison, "Help us." The walls began to rattle. Pictures fell. The sound of hands, hundreds of hands, scraped along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Clara ran to the front door, but it slammed shut on its own. Then, slowly, the cellar door began to creak open. From the darkness below came a sound, like someone dragging chains across the dirt. And then a voice, deeper than anything human, growled, "You opened it." The cellar stairs creaked as something began to climb. Clara backed into a corner, tears streaming down her face. The thing that emerged was not her grandmother. It was tall, twisted, its face hidden behind a burlap sack soaked in something dark. It took one long breath and said in her grandmother's voice, "I told you never to open the cellar." The next morning, the cabin was empty. The only sign of Clara was her flashlight lying by the well, still flickering. Locals say that if you spend a night in that cabin, you can still hear the rocking chair creak, and sometimes a faint whisper coming from the cellar door. "Help me." They also say that every October, a light flickers by the well, and if you follow it, the rain had been falling for 3 straight days when Mark decided to drive through the back roads of the Appalachian Mountains. He was a delivery driver, the kind who worked long shifts and preferred shortcuts that shaved a few minutes off his route. But this road, the one that wound deep into the hills and cut through fog-drenched valleys, was not on any map his GPS could follow. He had taken it before, once or twice, when he wanted a bit of peace from the highways. But that October night, something felt wrong the moment his tires left the pavement. The forest pressed in on both sides of the road. The trees looked older than anything he had ever seen, their roots thick and gnarled, breaking through the asphalt like bones pushing through skin. The rain turned to mist. His wipers squeaked, struggling to keep up. He turned down the radio. It had started crackling with static, even though the signal had been clear a minute ago. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. Mark slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, sliding sideways on the wet asphalt. He stopped just a few feet away. The figure didn't move. It was a woman, barefoot, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. Mark rolled down his window slightly, his heart hammering. "Hey, are you all right? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. She just stared. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and filled with something that looked like pure terror. Then slowly she pointed, past him toward the woods. Mark turned to look, but there was nothing, just trees swaying in the fog. When he looked back, the woman was gone. He got out, flashlight in hand, calling, "Hello, ma'am?" No answer, only the sound of the rain dripping through the leaves. He felt cold air on his neck, like a breath. He spun around, no one there. Mark got back in the truck, locked the doors and tried to start the engine. Nothing, just the dull click of a dead ignition. He cursed, slamming his hands on the wheel. Then he saw it in the mirror, the woman, standing behind his truck. Her mouth was open, her head tilted to one side, her arms hung limply at her sides, and she was whispering something, but he couldn't hear over the rain. He turned on the headlights. The beams hit her, and for a split second he saw it. Her body was covered in mud. Her skin was gray, cracked, and her legs, they weren't touching the ground. Mark froze. The woman began to drift toward the driver's side door, her movements slow, unnatural. Then he heard her voice, faint but clear. "He's behind you." Mark whipped around. There was nothing, only the dark cab of the truck. When he looked back outside, the woman was gone again. He turned the key once more. The engine roared to life. Relief flooded him. He slammed the truck into drive and took off, speeding through the rain. But as he drove, he noticed something strange. The road didn't look familiar anymore. He should have been out of the woods by now. Instead, the same trees passed by again and again. The same bent pine, the same fallen sign. He slowed down, his headlights flickered, and then he saw it. A sign by the side of the road, weathered and cracked, half covered by moss. It read, "Welcome to Cold Hollow, population 0. Mark blinked. Cold Hollow didn't exist, at least not anymore. He remembered hearing about it, a town that had been wiped out decades ago by a landslide. No one survived, the woman in the road. Could she have been from there? Then the radio came to life. A woman's voice crackled through the static. "He's behind you." Mark's chest tightened. He didn't turn around this time, he couldn't. He just drove faster. But the more he drove, the more it felt like the forest was folding in on itself. The fog grew so thick that even his headlights couldn't pierce it. And then, through the mist ahead, he saw lights, faint yellow ones flickering in a row. He pulled closer. It was a small town, but it looked wrong. The buildings were old, decayed, windows broken, the streets empty. Yet the streetlights still burned. He stopped in front of a gas station. The sign above it said, "Cold Hollow Fuel." His radio still whispered, a low hum of static and breathing. Then, over the sound, came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the glass of his passenger side window. Mark turned. The woman was there again, only now her face was pressed against the glass. Her eyes were pure white, and behind her in the fog, dozens more figures emerged, pale, drenched, and silent. The truck's engine died. The lights went out. The last thing Mark ever saw was his own reflection in the windshield, and behind it, a tall shadow with antlers towering over the truck. Weeks later, police found his vehicle empty, headlights still on, idling in front of that same broken gas station. But the town of Cold Hollow, it never existed, at least not anymore. There is something about the Appalachian fog in October that makes you feel like the world has stopped breathing. It rolls through the hollows and valleys like smoke from a dying fire, swallowing everything it touches. That is exactly how Daniel felt the night he saw the fog move against the wind. Daniel was a wildlife photographer. He had come to a small section of the Blue Ridge Mountains hoping to capture the fall colors before the season passed. Locals warned him that the ridge he was headed toward, Ridge 47, was cursed. They said people who went camping there alone sometimes came back changed, or never came back at all. Daniel laughed it off. He had camped in worse places. By sunset, he pitched his tent near an overlook, surrounded by nothing but endless trees and the distant call of an owl. He cooked a small meal, zipped himself into his sleeping bag, and listened to the sound of rain tapping gently on the tent. Then around midnight the tapping stopped. At first, he thought the rain had ended, but then he realized the sound was still there, not on the tent but beside it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling. Daniel held his breath. He reached for his flashlight, turned it on and aimed it toward the flap. "Hello?" he called out. "Someone there?" No answer, only silence. Then a faint voice whispered from outside. "It's cold out here." Daniel froze. The voice was soft, almost pleading, a woman's voice. He unzipped the tent slightly and shone the light outside. Nothing but fog. "Do you need help?" he asked. "Where are you?" The voice came again, this time from the opposite side of the tent. "I'm right here!" Daniel spun, pointing the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. He zipped the tent closed fully, his heart pounding. He told himself it was just his imagination. Maybe the wind, maybe a trick of sound. He lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag up to his chin. That was when he heard breathing. From inside the tent, he turned the light on again, sweeping it through the small space. Empty. Then the voice whispered inches from his ear. "You shouldn't have come here," Daniel screamed, ripped open the tent, and stumbled out into the cold. The fog had thickened so much he could barely see his hands in front of him. He ran toward the trail, but the woods seemed to twist around him. The trees were too close, the path unfamiliar. It was as if the forest had changed. Through the mist a figure appeared. A woman in a long dress, her hair wet, clinging to her face. She stared at him, unmoving. Daniel stopped several feet away, breathing hard. "Who are you?" She didn't respond. She just lifted her arm and pointed toward his tent. He turned to look. The tent was burning, bright orange flames licking through the fog. He ran back, desperate to grab his camera and gear. But when he reached the spot, there was no fire, no tent. Nothing but wet earth and fog. The woman was gone. Daniel started back down the ridge, flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam cut through the fog, catching on something. A wooden post sticking from the ground. It looked like a sign, but the words were old and carved by hand. He brushed away the dirt and read, "Ridge 47. Do not camp." A sudden gust of wind blew the fog apart for a moment. revealing something in the distance, dozens of crosses made of branches and twine, some small, some human-sized. Then the fog closed again. Daniel ran. Branches whipped at his face, roots clawed at his boots. He didn't stop until he saw the faint glow of his truck headlights. He dove inside, locking the doors, and turned the ignition. The truck wouldn't start. His hand shook as he tried again. Still nothing. Then his headlights flickered on by themselves, and there she was, the woman, standing directly in front of the truck, eyes hollow, skin pale. She raised a hand and pressed it against the hood. Then she whispered, her voice somehow echoing inside the cab. "You took their pictures." Daniel's blood ran cold. He looked down at his camera, which sat on the passenger seat. He hadn't realized until now that it was still on. The small screen showed the last photo he had taken. It wasn't the trees, it wasn't the ridge, it was his tent, with a dark figure standing over it, staring right into the lens. He looked up, but the woman was gone. Only fog. The truck engine finally roared to life. He didn't hesitate. He drove until morning light cut through the mist and he reached the next town. When he told locals what he'd seen, one old man nodded slowly. "You camped on Ridge 47, didn't you?" he said. Daniel nodded, still trembling. The man sighed. "That fog you saw, it doesn't follow the wind. It follows those who take from it." That night, when Daniel checked his camera again, every photo from that trip was gone, except one. It was the picture of his tent, and in the corner of that image, barely visible, the first thing you notice in the Appalachian Mountains after dark is how quiet everything becomes. No birds, no wind, not even the rustle of leaves, just silence. That kind of silence makes your brain start to invent noises that aren't really there. At least that's what Megan thought at first. Megan was 27, a nature vlogger who had made a name for herself exploring hidden trails throughout Appalachia. October was her favorite month. She loved the fog, the red-orange leaves, and the lonely beauty of the season. For her next video, she planned to camp near an abandoned fire lookout tower just outside of Black Hollow. Locals warned her about that place, of course. They said things watched from the trees. They said you could hear laughter echoing through the woods even when you were alone. But Megan thrived on danger. She brushed it off, drove her Jeep up the old service road, and hiked the last 2 miles with her camera equipment strapped to her back. By the time she reached the tower, the sun was already dying behind the ridgeline, spilling orange light across the mountain tops. The tower itself was rusted and half collapsed, with long iron stairs curling upward like a broken spine. She set up her tent nearby, started a small fire, and began recording her opening monologue. Her viewers loved her calm, confident tone, but as she replayed the footage, something in the background made her pause. There was a faint laugh, soft, almost playful, coming from the trees behind her. She looked up. Nothing. She shrugged it off, assuming maybe her mic picked up an echo. But later that night, she heard it again, louder, closer. Megan grabbed her flashlight and camera. "All right, guys," she whispered into the lens. "There's someone out there. I'm gonna check it out." The woods were heavy with fog. Her beam of light sliced through the mist, but revealed nothing except twisted branches. Then she heard it again. A child's laughter. She turned toward it, calling out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. Only the creaking of the tower above her. She pointed the flashlight up. A dark silhouette moved along the platform. For a second it looked like a man, tall, leaning over the edge. But when she blinked, it was gone. She told herself she was just tired. Still, she decided to sleep in her Jeep that night instead of the tent. Safer, she thought. She locked all the doors and reclined the seat. The forest was silent again. She closed her eyes. Sometime past midnight, she woke to a faint tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. She opened her eyes slowly. Someone was standing outside. their face pressed against the glass. The flashlight was still on in the passenger seat. She turned it slightly toward the window. No one was there. Her breath fogged the glass. The tapping came again. This time from the opposite side. Tap, tap, tap. She looked out the driver's side. Nothing. But when she turned back, she froze. There were small handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the windshield, as if children had been pressing their palms against it. Her camera was still recording on the dashboard. She picked it up with shaking hands and whispered, "If anyone finds this, something is out here with me." The laughter came again, right outside the car now, circling her slowly. It grew louder, overlapping, like several voices laughing at once. She jammed the keys into the ignition. The Jeep sputtered, coughed, then started. She hit the gas, tearing down the dirt road as the laughter followed her into the dark. When she reached the main road, she stopped for breath, chest heaving. She looked at the camera screen. The red record light was still blinking. She rewound the footage a few seconds to see what it had captured. The screen showed her face, pale, terrified. And behind her, in the reflection of the glass, 3 shapes. Children, thin, mud-streaked, their faces half missing, eyes black, and they were smiling. Megan didn't go back to the woods after that. She uploaded the video weeks later, but edited out the part with the laughter. She claimed the strange sounds were forest echoes, but one night, a viewer left a comment that made her blood run cold. "I grew up near Black Hollow. My brother and I used to play near that tower. We were climbing it one afternoon when it collapsed. He didn't make it. That was 40 years ago. And I swear the voice in your video sounds just like him." For days after that comment, Megan's subscribers said she seemed different. Quieter, more withdrawn. In her final video, she was back in her apartment speaking directly to the camera. She said, "If you ever hear laughter in the woods, don't follow it. They don't want you to leave." She ended the recording with a trembling smile. And that was the last anyone ever saw of her. Her channel remains online, frozen in time. But once every few weeks, a new video appears only a few seconds long, showing the forest at night, the fire tower in the distance, and a faint child's laugh. If you ever drive deep enough into the Appalachian Mountains, you might pass through a town called Marrow Creek, or at least what's left of it. The highway doesn't list it anymore. GPS skips right over it, but if you follow the old mining road, past the rusted signs and abandoned gas station, you'll find a cluster of crumbling buildings that look frozen in time. And if you arrive at dusk, you might notice something strange. A light burning in the window of the old church at the end of the street. No one lives there anymore, at least not the way they used to. In the fall of 2012, a young journalist named Tyler Grant came to Marrow Creek chasing a rumor. He'd been writing a column about forgotten places of Appalachia, small towns that vanished after the coal mines dried up. Marrow Creek was supposed to be another ghost story, the kind locals whispered about but no one could prove existed. Tyler arrived on October 18th. The sky was gray, the air smelled like wet leaves, and the forest seemed to lean in from all sides. He parked his car near the collapsed post office and started recording with his camcorder. "Marrow Creek, West Virginia," he said, "population 0. Or so they say. The town looked exactly like he imagined. Rusted cars, broken windows, and homes swallowed by vines. But something about it didn't feel right. The streets were clean. Too clean. No animal tracks, no fallen branches. It was as if someone had swept them recently. He explored for an hour before he reached the church. The sign above the door read First Baptist of Marrow Creek, but the Baptist part was half missing, rotted away. The door was slightly open. Tyler pushed it, the hinges crying out into the silence. Inside, the pews were intact, though thick with dust. A Bible lay open on the pulpit, and in the back corner, near the old baptismal font. Something flickered, a candle, freshly lit. Tyler froze. Someone was here. He turned off his flashlight, crouched low, and whispered into his mic, "Looks like I'm not alone." The candle's flame swayed slightly as if disturbed by a breath. Then he heard it. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from the hallway behind the pulpit. He turned the camera toward the sound, but the battery light blinked red. Dead. The footsteps grew closer. He reached for his flashlight. Before he could turn it on, the candle went out. Darkness swallowed him whole. He stumbled backward, tripping over a broken pew, and hit the floor hard as he scrambled to stand. Something brushed against his arm, soft and cold, like wet fabric. He swung the flashlight toward it, but there was nothing there, only a damp handprint left on the sleeve of his jacket. He bolted from the church, heart hammering, and didn't stop running until he reached his car. He jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw movement. Faint shapes standing at the edge of the street. There were 5 of them. They looked like townspeople, dressed in clothes from the 1940s. Suspenders, bonnets, long skirts. Their skin was gray, their eyes completely white, and they were all staring at him. He floored the gas pedal and tore out of town, gravel spitting beneath his tires. He didn't look back that night. He uploaded a single photo to his blog, a still frame from the camcorder before it died. It showed the inside of the church empty and dark, except for one detail, a shadow behind the pulpit, shaped like a man hanging from a rope. The post went viral for a while. Shared among horror forums and urban explorers, people said it was fake, a clever hoax. But locals from nearby towns knew the truth. They remembered the story. Marrow Creek wasn't abandoned because of the mines. It was abandoned because of the pastor. Reverend Amos Holt in 1949, Holt claimed he'd received a vision that his congregation needed to be purified before the rapture. He led them into the church one Sunday and locked the doors from the inside. When the sheriff arrived 2 days later, every man, woman, and child in that church was dead. Some hanged, some poisoned. The bodies were buried on site. But no one stayed to rebuild. The town died with them. And every October, locals say the congregation still gathers in that church. Their candlelight flickers in the windows. Their hymns echo through the valley. Tyler never returned to Marrow Creek, but his camera did 2 years later. A hiker found it near a creek bed, a few miles north of the town. The footage was water damaged, but one scene remained intact. Tyler walking toward the church at night, whispering, "It's still here. They're waiting for me." Then the screen cut to black. A truck driver passing through that area in 2020 claimed he saw something strange around midnight. A group of people standing in the middle of the road. Dressed in old-fashioned church clothes, he honked his horn, but they didn't move. He swerved to avoid them, and when he looked in his side mirror, they were gone. The next morning, police found tire marks on the road and wet footprints leading into the woods. Some say the townsfolk of Marrow Creek don't know they're dead. Others say they do, and they want you to join them. Whatever the truth is, that church still stands, and sometimes, when the fog rolls thick through the valley, a light burns once again in its window, flickering softly, waiting for another traveler to stop and see. There are places in the Appalachian Mountains that do not appear on any map, because no one who's tried to chart them has ever made it back. Locals call these areas the quiet zones. No birds, no wind, no echoes, just silence. That's where our next story begins. It was October 23rd, 2021, when a group of 3 friends, Allison, Luke, and Marcus, decided to go hiking along an unmarked trail near Boone, North Carolina. They were documentary students from Raleigh, working on a project called The Vanishing Appalachia. a short film about strange disappearances in the region. They'd read stories online about people hearing voices in the woods, about abandoned cabins that looked newly lived in, and lights flickering through the trees with no clear source. It was supposed to be urban legend content, clickbait until it wasn't. Allison kept a detailed log of the trip, voice recordings mostly, all recovered from her phone weeks later by park rangers. The last file was timestamped 1:37 a.m., and it began like this. We're camping near the creek. Luke says he saw someone across the water. Looked like a woman, long hair, no flashlight. She disappeared when he called out. At first, they thought it was just another hiker. Maybe someone lost, but as night thickened, they began to hear footsteps circling the tent. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to press the wet leaves. Marcus unzipped the flap and shined his light. But nothing was there. Then a stone hit the side of their tent. Another and another. The recording continued. We're packing up. Something's not right. There's no service out here. I think we need to leave. They started back toward the car in the dark, following the creek downstream. That's when they noticed the silence. No frogs, no crickets. Not even the rustle of trees, Luke said softly. We're in one of the quiet zones. A few minutes later, Marcus tripped on something buried under leaves. They cleared the dirt and found an old trail marker. A wooden cross nailed to a tree with the word "Return" carved into it. That's when Allison's recorder picked up something faint in the background. Whistling, it wasn't coming from ahead or behind. It was all around them, echoing faintly in the still air. Marcus tried shouting, "Who's out there?" The whistling stopped. Then came a voice. A woman's voice, cracked and hollow. "You should not be here," Allison gasped. "Who said that?" The recorder went fuzzy. Static filled the next 30 seconds. When the sound cleared again, Allison's breathing was fast and uneven. "Marcus is gone. He was right next to me. He screamed, and now he's gone. We're running." From there, the recording became chaotic. Branches snapping, Allison crying, Luke shouting her name. Then abruptly it stopped. 2 days later, park rangers found their campsite abandoned. Their tent was shredded, camera equipment scattered, and strange symbols carved into the trees. Spirals surrounded by what looked like claw marks. Allison's phone was discovered near the creek, wrapped in her jacket. No signs of her, Luke or Marcus. Authorities ruled it as possible animal attack, but the evidence didn't match. No blood, no torn clothing, just footprints leading deeper into the woods, and then stopping. Local legend says those woods are home to the Whistler of Watauga, an old Appalachian ghost story passed down for generations. According to elders, there was once a woman named Eliza Merrin who lived alone deep in the forest during the late 1800s. She was accused of witchcraft after several children went missing in the nearby town. The townsfolk burned her cabin to the ground. Her body was never found. A week later, the men who led the mob vanished too. Searchers found only their boots, standing upright at the edge of the creek, as if they had stepped out of them before disappearing. From then on, travelers claimed they heard whistling near the creek at night, the same tune Eliza was known for humming while working in her garden. They called it the Whistler's Tune. Anyone who heard it and ignored it would vanish before dawn. Park rangers don't talk about it openly, but several have reported hearing faint melodies through the trees when patrolling after sunset. One even quit on the spot, leaving a note that read, "I saw her. She smiled at me from across the water, and the reflection wasn't hers." In 2022, hikers discovered a new wooden cross nailed to a tree near where Allison's phone was found. It said only one thing: "I told you not to be here." The carvings looked fresh, but there were no footprints. A local historian, interviewed later by a paranormal podcast, made an unsettling observation. He said the spiral carvings found near the site weren't random. They were protective symbols, old Appalachian wards used to trap restless spirits, meaning someone, or something, was trying to keep Eliza from leaving that area. The host asked him, "Do you think she's real?" He replied, "Oh, she's real, but she isn't human anymore." That night, the host received an anonymous email from an untraceable account. Attached was an audio file labeled Eliza 1, WAV. When they played it live during the broadcast, all listeners heard was faint static and a distant, trembling whistle, the same melody from Allison's recording. Some said it was a hoax, others said it sounded too real. But a few reported something even stranger. They claimed that after hearing it, they began to hear that same tune in their own homes, faintly, like someone whistling just beyond the walls. And those listeners, the ones who mentioned the sound, stopped responding to the show's emails shortly after. If you ever find yourself hiking in Appalachia and hear soft whistling through the trees, whatever you do not whistle back, do not follow it, and never, ever look across the water after dark, because if you do, you might see a pale woman standing there. It was the kind of October night that seemed alive. The trees whispered, the wind carried voices, and every step in the forest echoed like footsteps following behind. Miles Turner had lived in the Appalachian foothills his whole life. He was a retired coal miner who'd seen it all. Strange lights above the ridges, unmarked graves in the woods, even ghost stories passed down from his grandfather. But he never believed them, until the night his dog, Buddy, ran into Dark Ridge Hollow. It happened just after dusk. Miles was sitting on his porch when Buddy began barking toward the tree line, hackles raised. Then, without warning, the dog bolted into the woods, whining and yelping as if chasing something unseen. Miles grabbed his flashlight and rifle and followed. The deeper he went, the quieter the woods became. No insects, no owls, just a deep, unnatural silence that pressed against his ears. "Buddy!" he called. Only his echo answered. Then, from somewhere far ahead, came a single bark, sharp and panicked. He quickened his pace, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the fog. He finally found the dog's collar lying in the dirt. The metal tag still warm to the touch, but Buddy was nowhere. That was when Miles noticed something strange. The ground ahead wasn't right. The leaves looked darker, too uniform, like a carpet hiding something beneath. He brushed them aside and uncovered wooden boards, rotten, soft, almost black with age, a trapdoor. He hesitated, his gut screaming to turn around, but Buddy was family, and the sound of whimpering came faintly from below. So he pried open the door and shone his light down. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The smell that drifted up was enough to make him gag. Earth, mildew, and something metallic. Blood, maybe. He took a deep breath and climbed down. The air grew colder with each step. The walls were rough stone carved long ago, and lining the walls were carvings, faces, human faces, dozens of them, etched into the rock, mouths open as if screaming. Miles swallowed hard. "Buddy?" No answer. Only faint, dripping water. He reached the bottom and entered a wide chamber. Bones covered the floor, hundreds of them. Not just animals, human. And at the center of the room stood a wooden chair. A single oil lamp burned beside it. On the chair lay a tattered journal, its pages damp and curling. He picked it up and squinted at the faded writing. "To whoever finds this, he wakes when the leaves fall. The Hollow King cannot die. We built his prison in stone and carved the faces of his victims to keep him asleep. But they whisper now. They say he's hungry." The pages were stained with brown streaks. Blood dried long ago. Suddenly a faint growl echoed behind him. Miles swung his flashlight around. The beam caught movement. Something tall, moving between the pillars. He raised his rifle. "Who's there?" The thing stepped forward. It wasn't human, 8 feet tall. skin pale and stretched tight over bones. Its face was long and hollow, its eyes two black pits, and when it opened its mouth, it didn't breathe, it whistled. Miles stumbled back, firing a shot. The bullet passed through the creature as if through mist. It lunged forward, its long fingers wrapping around his wrist. Its touch burned like ice, buddy, he whispered. Behind the creature, he saw movement. His dog was there, but something was wrong. Its eyes glowed red. It tilted its head unnaturally, and from its throat came a soft, trembling whistle. The same tune from the Whistler legend. Miles screamed and fired again, then turned and bolted up the stairs. He could hear the thing following, claws scraping against stone. The air grew hot, like the earth itself was burning. He burst through the trapdoor, slammed it shut, and ran back toward home without looking back. The sound of whistling followed him the entire way. When he reached his porch, he collapsed. The woods were still, quiet for a moment. He thought maybe it was over. Then he heard it. 3 slow knocks on his door. He froze. 3 more knocks. Who's there? He shouted, trembling. No answer. He looked through the peephole. Nobody there, just the woods then. As he stepped back, his phone buzzed on the table. A text message from an unknown number. It said, "You opened his door." Miles didn't sleep that night. When the sun rose, he went back to Dark Ridge Hollow with local police. But when they reached the spot, the trapdoor was gone. No hole, no stairs, no sign it had ever been there. They said he must have dreamed it, but when he got home, Buddy was waiting on the porch. Wagging his tail, relieved, Miles ran to him, tears streaming down his face. But when he crouched down and looked closer, his blood froze. Around the dog's neck was a new collar, handmade from rough leather. Carved into it, crudely but clear, were 2 words, Hollow King. Miles packed his bags that night and left Appalachia forever, but 2 months later, his neighbor found his cabin door open inside. There were muddy footprints leading from the woods to the living room, and carved into the wall above the fireplace were words written in jagged lines. It was late October, and the Appalachian Mountains were cloaked in mist, thick enough to swallow sound. The moon barely pierced the clouds, and the wind pushed through the trees like a warning. That night, Sheriff Tom Ralston got the call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 3 hikers had gone missing near an old mining settlement called Cold Hollow. The area had been abandoned for decades, ever since the collapse that buried 12 miners alive back in 1953. Locals said the dead never left. Tom had grown up hearing those stories. Whispers about lights flickering in the woods, voices calling from deep in the shafts, and the sound of picks tapping long after the mines closed. He never believed it, of course, but when dispatch told him the hikers had left behind a tent with blood on the zipper and all their gear still inside, he knew this was no ordinary call. He loaded his truck, grabbed his shotgun, and drove into the mountains. The closer he got to Cold Hollow, the less the radio worked. Static filled the air, and his headlights caught strange shapes moving between the trees. Too fast to be human, too tall to be deer. He arrived at the trailhead just before midnight. The hiker's tent was half collapsed, one sleeping bag ripped open. There were footprints leading into the trees, 3 sets in, none out. Tom switched on his flashlight and followed the trail. The mist was so thick he could barely see 5 feet ahead. Each step seemed to echo forever, and more than once he thought he heard footsteps behind him, perfectly in sync with his own. After a half-mile, the trail opened into a clearing, and there it was, an old mine entrance, sealed with rusted metal bars on one of the beams. Someone had smeared a message in mud or maybe dried blood. "He keeps what enters." Tom's stomach twisted. He shouted the hikers' names, but the sound came back distorted, like someone repeating it through water. Then he heard it faint, a cry for help. It came from inside the mine. He gritted his teeth, pried the bars open with his crowbar, and ducked inside. The tunnel was narrow and wet, the air thick with rot and coal dust. His flashlight flickered with every step. After about 50 yards, he found a backpack, torn open, soaked in something dark. Then just ahead, a helmet light blinked weakly from the floor. He picked it up and froze. Beside it was a hand, pale, dirt-caked, severed clean at the wrist. Tom staggered back, breathing hard. The tunnel behind him was darker now, like the light didn't want to go that way. Then he heard movement, slow, dragging footsteps from deeper in the mine. "Hello?" he called. The footsteps stopped. Then faintly a whisper answered, "Help me." It was a woman's voice. Weak, trembling, he followed the sound, gun raised. The tunnel widened into a chamber, and there, sitting against the far wall, was one of the hikers, a young woman, eyes wide with terror. "Ma'am, it's okay," Tom said softly. "You're safe now," but she didn't move. Didn't even blink. He stepped closer, shining his light on her face. And his blood ran cold. Her eyes weren't real. They were painted. Her skin was wax. She wasn't alive. She was a mannequin. And carved into her chest were words that made his stomach turn. "We mine what's left." Tom turned and ran. The tunnel behind him seemed to shift. The walls narrowing, the air grew colder, thicker, until breathing hurt. He burst into another chamber, this one filled with movement, shapes in the dark, dozens of them. Hunched and twitching, he aimed his light miners, or what was left of them, skin like parchment, mouths filled with black dust. Their eyes glowed faintly, hollow and endless. One of them stepped forward, dragging a pickaxe across the ground. The sound echoed like thunder. "You came for them," it rasped, voice layered with a dozen tones. "Now you stay," Tom fired, the blast lighting up the tunnel. But when the smoke cleared, they were gone. The only thing left was the echo of shovels digging in the dark. He stumbled backward and ran toward the entrance. But the tunnel was closing in. The walls pulsed like flesh, squeezing tighter with each step. He dropped his flashlight, and in that final flicker, he saw hands, dozens of them, reaching from the walls, grabbing at his clothes, his throat, his legs. He screamed, clawing toward the faint sliver of moonlight at the end of the tunnel. He burst out onto the trail and fell into the dirt, gasping for air. The entrance behind him sealed shut with a deep, echoing thud. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck. When he looked back, the woods were silent again. The mine was gone like it had never existed. Tom radioed for backup, but when officers arrived an hour later, they found him sitting in the road, staring at nothing. His shotgun lay across his lap. The barrel bent like it had been crushed. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, all he said was, "They're still down there." Digging, the department wrote it off as trauma. The hikers were never found, but 1 week later, a park ranger exploring a nearby ridge found something strange. An old miner's helmet, fresh dirt on the lamp. Inside the rim, scratched into the metal, were 3 initials, the hikers' names, and beneath them 4 new letters, TR, Tom Ralston. That night, the sheriff's station security camera caught something impossible. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the front door opened by itself. The lights flickered, and for a split second, a shadow appeared on the monitor. A man in a miner's uniform, face obscured, covered in coal dust. In his hand he held a helmet, Tom's helmet. Then the screen went black. To this day, locals say that if you stand at the base of Cold Hollow after midnight, you can hear the sound of picks striking stone. Steady, patient, waiting for another to join the crew. So if you ever find yourself hiking the Appalachian Mountains this October, and you hear tapping from deep underground, do not answer, because some tunnels were never meant to be opened, and some voices were never meant to be heard. Before you go, remember to hit that subscribe button Leave a like and tell me where you are watching from tonight. I read every comment, and who knows, your